All right, folks, if you could believe it, it's been many, many years, 1985, since Leon Klinghoffer was thrown overboard on the Achille Lauro, a ship that was hijacked by PLO terrorists, and they threw him overboard in his wheelchair. He was wheelchair bound, American citizen. And now, believe it or not, there is an opera about it, an opera that the Met here in New York was not only going to go forward in presenting, but also they were going to simulcast it to facilities and venues around the world. They've backed off of that, thanks in part to pressure brought by the organization represented by our next guest and others. And joining us now to talk about this is Ken Jacobson, Deputy National Director for the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. And Ken, thank you for joining us today, sir.
Good to be here.
All right, explain this to me. I mean, in a post-9/11 world, but even if it were in a post-9/11 world, I've heard many reports about this opera, which is called The Death of Klinghoffer, and it portrays in a positive light to a great extent the hijackers, the terrorists who threw this American citizen in a wheelchair, Jewish man, overboard.
Yeah, it's a troubling opera. First of all, I want to make it clear the opera was developed in the early 90s. It's been around a while, but of course its heightened attention is because the Metropolitan Opera has chosen to put it on this year. It is troubling. It's basically, it tries to, it doesn't defend the terrorists, but it contextualizes their actions in a way and relates it to the suffering that they claim imposed on Palestinians by Israel, and subliminally leave the impression that the terrorists had reason to do what they did. And of course, to do that in the face of horrible terrorism is not only personally offensive to the family, we're very close to the Klinghoffer sisters, but it's so counterproductive in a world where terrorism is such a great threat to once again go into this rationalization of terror, which is such a horror, is such a terrible thing to be doing in this day and age.
Yeah, and it also, especially in a world full of anti-Semitism, which we'll get to in a second. So let's take it one step at a time. A good move, and you welcome it. I'm sure that the Met is not going to now broadcast this opera all over the world at the same time that it's appearing on their stage, correct?
That's correct. And our point is, look, we believe in freedom of expression. Artistic works have a right to be shown, but we also were concerned, particularly in light of an ADL survey, global survey on anti-Semitism around the world, which showed significantly high manifestations of anti-Semitic attitudes in Europe and elsewhere in the world at this particular time, to be showing a film which we're not claiming is anti-Semitic, but which we say is full of all kinds of bias and could easily rationalize anti-Semitism in many places.
Yeah, I mean, among other things, it perpetuates libels, traditional libels against Jews. It also, and this could be more dangerous than if it did glorify the terrorists and was full of anti-Semitism, because then people could see it for what it is. But it's very clever from what I've seen and heard of it, not seeing it firsthand, in that it's very subtle, and it makes you want to empathize, or some people believe makes you want to empathize with the terrorists. So it has a way of getting its message through without the blatant, overwhelming anti-Semitism that would be so obvious to many, correct?
That's exactly right. We have said that people are claiming it's anti-Semitic. I've seen the movie version, I've read the libretto, and there is one scene in which one of the terrorists engages in the worst kind of anti-Semitic stereotypes, but you always have to contextualize. That did not make this guy look good. It wasn't that the opera maker was saying, in effect, this is good stuff. On the contrary, in that moment, he was painting the terrorist for what he was, as an anti-Semite. So we're not claiming that the film itself is anti-Semitic. We're doing exactly what you said. We're saying exactly what you said, which is that the film, and then now the opera itself, really rationalized terrorism in a way, and in effect by blaming Israel for what it's doing to the Palestinians. That's the way the opera begins. Here's a film, an opera about a terrorist murder, and it begins with words about how the Israelis allegedly drove the Palestinians from the Holy Land. And so that sets the stage for everything to come.
Yeah, and of course, you know, that's the goal here. But what about the fact that the Met is still going ahead with this opera. Do you have problems with that? Does your organization, are you still trying to get that changed?
No, we're not. Look, we would have preferred that they chose not to select this opera in the first instance, but we understand we live in a free society, and this is an artistic expression. Peter Gelb, who's been very responsive, he was the one who made the decision.
The head of the museum, of the opera,
the general manager of the opera, has been very responsive, has also referred to this John Adams, the composer, as one of the great modern American composers of opera. So we're not getting into the business of artistic expression. What we were concerned about was the potential impact on anti-Semitism around the world through the simulcast. So we were very pleased that they agreed to cancel that event.
I know your organization is better aware of this than I, but I am reading a report that talks about, first of all, it's a story at the Washington Post about a new anti-Semitism arising in France. This one concentrates on France, and it talks about a French comedian who performs, and you know, he says that he's, at the start he says, I am not an anti-Semite, and then it says, then come the Jew jokes. And it goes on from there, and this coincides with the fact that more and more Jews feel the need to leave France and are heading to Israel, which is a nice thing for Israel, I would imagine, but you know, it's probably for the wrong reasons in many cases. What could you tell us about what you know about the rise of anti-Semitism? Unfortunately, not only in France, but throughout Western Europe.
Yeah, we're witnessing another resurgence of anti-Semitism in Western Europe coming from several sources. We have far-right groups involved, and we also have Muslim extremist groups involved, and we also found in the ADL survey a very high attitudinal problem with regard to the French and anti-Semitism. 37% of French people have anti-Semitic attitudes. So there are some old problems that have never been resolved. The French government and leadership, by the way, have been very good on these issues, but there are questions about the future of Jews in France and elsewhere in Europe. And I think you have a combination of issues in Europe these days: identity problems, Muslim extremism problems, far-right problems, and the European continent is going through a tremendous turmoil, and the impact on Jews overall is not very good.
What about the situation that we heard so much about, which is dissipated, at least in coverage today, in Ukraine, and the notice that went around that Jews have to register, which brought back all kinds of horrific memories and parallels to Nazi Germany. But also, you know, there was a vote in the UN, and Susan Rice once again was critical of Israel for not going along with the United States on that vote. But there have been issues with Ukraine and Jews for you know, historically speaking, and I think that's one of the reasons why, in addition to what's going on there now, that Israel either abstained or did not vote along with the United States on their resolution regarding Ukraine. So what could you tell us about that situation?
Well, I have two things to say about Ukraine. First of all, there's a very unfortunate history of anti-Semitism there. During the Holocaust, it was one of the worst places, and there still are some groups in Ukraine that are problematic. Having said that, I want to make it clear that the problems that are currently existing in Ukraine are coming almost entirely from Putin and from Russia. And most of the problems there are because of the expansionist ideas that Putin has. And so I want to distinguish between some of these problems and the larger issue, and the larger issue is Putin.
And well, okay, and how so? You think is this an extension of his KGB days, and of course the Soviet Union, the way they treated Jews, and of course
it's not his treatment of Jews here; it's his treatment of Ukraine, in which he's once again asserting that parts of it are what he calls the new Russia. Right. In the course of it, it creates the kind of turmoil in which Jews are usually exposed.
Yeah, scapegoated, exposed. What do you see coming in the near future with regard to Western Europe and other areas that are problematic now for Jews? Getting worse, or is there any hope that it could get better, realistically?
I think a lot of there are many issues in Europe, and it doesn't lend itself to a simple discussion. I'll just say this, that I think one of the great challenges of Europe is how they integrate their Muslim populations. In America, we are very good at integrating different groups. Europe is less so, and the way they will either integrate or fail to integrate their Muslim part will determine, in my view, the future of Jews in Europe. If they fail, what's going to happen is there'll be more Muslim extremism on the one hand, there'll be growth of far-right parties on the other hand, neither of which are good for Jews. If they succeed, I think Jews can have a future in Europe.
All right, Ken Jacobson, Deputy National Director, Anti-Defamation League. Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. All right, folks. Very interesting topic. Very sad that we still have to talk about this in the year 2014, but indeed we do, and indeed we will. When we come back on Newsmax Television, which of course, as you know now, is on DirecTV and Dish Network, we will have the first of the 3 Gimme Fives today. I think you'll find them all interesting, especially this first one coming up. So keep it right here. Steve Malzberg Show. Don't go away.